Welcome back to another episode of Direct Edition. I'm the guy, aka your host, Dave. I'm going to just jump right into it. Today's episode is going to feature an interview with 40-year comic veteran Bart Sears. But he's not just a comic veteran. He's also worked in the toy industry and just a great all-around artist, sculptor, painter, a little bit of everything. I met Bart earlier this year at HeroesCon in Charlotte, and I wanted to have him on the show for so many reasons, but the main reason is I'm a 90s kid, and Bart has created some great art throughout the 90s, including being the first artist on Valiant's Turok The Dinosaur Hunter, and also did some issues for Exo Manowar. And one of the other very notable things about his career in the 90s is he's the most prolific cover artist for Wizard magazine in the first 100 issues. He's an integral part of the 90s boom. We really get to talk deep in through his career, and he starts in DC Comics. He starts with also working with Hasbro, and we go all the way till present day where he's doing his creator-owned stuff. So I'm not going to talk much more. Why don't we jump into my interview with Bart Sears? Hey Bart.
Hey Dave, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. It's Saturday. Excellent. It's summer. Really nothing to complain about.
Well, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, of course. Excited to dive into your career and ask some of the hard-hitting questions.
Oh, awesome.
You're originally from New York, right? And that's where you live now?
Yes. I was born in Ithaca, grew up in North Syracuse, New York, and now I live outside of Utica, town.
All of the college towns.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up in Long Island, so we refer to your part of the state as upstate. So I've heard you talk about it before, that the first comic you remember kind of causing you to want to draw is the 80-page giant Batman 255. Neil Adams,
Night of the Bat.
Night of
the Wolf.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd loved comics before. I grew up with them. I had an older brother, so we always had comics around. So I pretty much grew up with them. But that was the one I saw and thought, I kind of like to do this. And I had been drawing since I was a kid and sculpting. But that was the first time it was like, I think I can do this stuff. So
when you were getting those comics, it was probably... Well, I don't know. Was it pre-comic book stores in your area? You were buying them at
Yes.
the pharmacies and Woolworth or something like that?
Yep. And the one I remember most as a kid was we had the proverbial corner store.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's nostalgic corner store now. I don't know. But I don't remember what day of the week, but they would get a cardboard box, I don't know what the size was, but filled with comics with the logos cut off.
Yeah.
How they used to, they didn't have to return the comics to get money back. Mm-hmm. They just send back the logos. And they were the first, when I started buying them, they were 20 for $1.
Wow.
And I had like $1 allowance or something. So that's where it went every week. I went down there and, I couldn't get full runs of anything. And of course, none of it would be ever worth money, but I never collected comics. I just read them and, tore them up and cut them up if I felt like I needed to for some reason or whatever. But that was, where I got most of my comics.
Yeah, the corner store. And it's funny because I don't think I can remember a time, and maybe you can, maybe it was different in your part, but a lot of the West Coast guys talk about how liquor stores would carry comics, but I don't remember ever seeing that in the East Coast.
I don't remember that either.
Yeah. I've had a couple people, including Joe Benitez, tell me, and I've heard Liefeld talk about it, but I think must be a California thing.
Yeah, it must be, because I didn't, at 10 years old, I didn't travel to many liquor stores either, but, it was always the drugstore, whatever they were, the local, or the grocery store usually all had a spinner racks. And,
yeah, I can remember buying comics in grocery stores when I was, kid growing up in the very early or the late 80s.
And so bookstores had them too. So
yeah, and we had plenty of those in all over New York. So I know that Neil Adams, and obviously a guy that I can see, I think it's pretty apparent, Frazetta is one of your big
Mhm.
influences. Any other comic book artists at that age that you can
Ross
remember?
Andrew.
Ross Andrew.
Yeah, if you look at my stuff and his stuff, you'll see a lot of similarities. And I didn't quite realize it until later, but I
Hmm.
loved his stuff as a kid, and had a lot of his. I can't remember what the book was called, but where Spider-Man would team up. Oh, what was
Probably
that?
Marvel Team Up.
I guess it was just Marvel Team Up, and
Yeah.
I think he did that for a while. But I had a bunch of his stuff, and I could see that was a heavy influence on me as well. As was
Hmm.
Buscema. I loved his
Yeah.
stuff, and I was always fascinated by how, before I understood how, how it happened, that Buscema's stuff always looked different depending on who inked it. I mean, you could always tell it was John, but
Yeah.
it always had a different look, and I didn't really understand how that was happening until, of course, I studied comics more and understood that there was a different guy inking it. And,
Yeah. Took me a
inking
long time
style
to
was a
figure
thing.
that.
Mm-hmm. It was the inkers who did the final look. Pencilers kind of did rough pencils back then. I mean, they didn't
Hmm.
indicate blacks or stuff, but line work was all pretty much up to whoever was inking it. Unlike
Yeah.
these days.
I think I looked at a lot of original Kirby stuff. He was the one guy that it was apparent to me, like it was the inker that dictated what that Kirby was going to look like.
Yeah.
More than any, I mean, yeah, more than anybody else I can think of, at least from a pre kind of 90s era.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first stuff I remember from Kirby was the early Captain America stuff. Not the early stuff he did, but the rebirth kind of stuff.
Yeah, the
From the 60s.
Mad Ball.
Yeah. And they printed it in little digest, like paperback size books. I remember having those, and that's where I first saw Kirby stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And, actually, that's where I first saw Ditko's stuff too, and Doctor Strange in there, and Spider-Man. Maybe it was
Yeah.
Spider-Man and those little ones. I don't think Doctor Strange made it to the little ones, but yeah, that was where I first got exposed to them, and I loved both of their stuff in those stupid little books.
Well, that's funny because that's primarily you'd see those in grocery stores at the checkout counter. It was the digest. I can still remember seeing them at the one at the grocery store near my house. So you've talked about it. One of your big influences early on was a teacher lent you some of the Andrew Loomis books.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
he
that
had
where you
one.
kind of become obsessed with drawing?
Yeah, I knew. At 10, I decided I wanted to draw comics, and by the time I got into high school, um, that was more kind of a little bit on the sidelines because I'd got into animating and dimensionally animating stuff. I had a little Super 8 with a single click, frame shot. So I was doing a lot of animation stuff then. But my grand plan was I knew I could eventually draw comics. My grand plan was to draw comics to put me through USC for film. That's how I was going to pay for school, because comics are so easy. But he gave me that Loomis book. He didn't give it to me, but he let me use it. And he pulled me aside after about a month of freshman year and said, Mr. D'Angelo was a teacher. And he said he was a sculptor and not surreal, abstract. He was an abstract sculptor. And he said, I can tell you're going to be an illustrator and probably want to do comics. He's like, that's the furthest thing. I don't really even know how to teach that. But I've got these books and I will, guide you as best I can along that path. So he pretty much gave me a different program from every other kid for as far as assignments and stuff. And he's pretty much geared everything towards illustration for me, which was awesome. But that Loomis book really defined how to structure basically everything. I mean, it's geared towards people, but it's all about the understructure. And that's where I always liked understructure, but I didn't understand what I was doing before then. And that really helped me learn how to, how to understand what I was trying to do and to do it better. But yeah, Loomis is.
So speaking about film, I didn't realize that that's where your passion originally lies, or at that point. Like, I went to
Yeah.
film school for a year and realized it just wasn't for me. But what any movies you can point to that maybe something that like you still go back to, or something that really jumped at you as a kid that put you on that path, or at least originally put you on that path?
I guess my original love was the Harryhausen films, the early
Mm-hmm.
King Kong, Valley of the Guanji, Mighty Joe Young, all those early, a lot of them black and white animated films. And Jason the Argonauts and stuff was color. But
Yeah.
that stuff I just loved. And that's what I started filming initially. And then I loved, story and heroic fiction. I'm trying to think of movies I would have seen back then that stuck with me. So many great movies,
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s, maybe less so in the 70s.
Interesting, because
And
the
then in the
70s is like pivotal.
and so many of their budgets were so low that some of the stuff was just really, I don't know, didn't appeal to me a whole lot. I mean, there were great ones. I mean, and Exorcist and stuff like that was just mind blowing for its time. And of
Yeah.
course, Star Wars and all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
that just changed everything
Oh yeah.
as
Yeah.
far as fantasy and science fiction movies go, and probably boosted any kind of film. The everything that could be possible then. But just a general love of film. I mean, I just love movies in general, and I'll sit and watch crap, which my wife won't do. But I don't mind watching. Spending 6 hours while I'm usually always doing it while I'm working, but
Right.
I don't mind watching even horrible movies. But I just love movies, and I wanted to direct, and that longing has never gone away. Just haven't ever found a place where I could comfortably do it or explore it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something that, I mean, like, it's time and it's a lot of work,
Yeah,
and it involves a lot of other people, unless you're making a no person film.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
The time
so
is the big killer, especially the
yeah,
last few years, because everybody make a film on their phone pretty much now. But
yeah,
if you
yeah,
want, but it's the all the time that goes into it, and who has time?
yeah, yeah, because it just kind of disappears.
Especially
Literally,
as you get
that's all.
older.
Yeah,
I
seriously.
remember days, as a teenager being bored, and it's like, die to be bored now.
Right? I completely agree. I mean, I have my hands in a lot of things, too, podcasts and editing and all that stuff, and I'm like, I could sit here for 5 minutes and like trick myself into thinking that it's an hour and I'm bored, but then I'm like, I gotta do this or this or this. And
Uh,
I think, and maybe you can speak to this. I mean, sculpting, illustration, all these different things, like, they filled up your childhood and then gave you this kind of like kickstart to just keep doing it for
yeah,
the rest of your life. And a lot of people don't ever even touch that. They don't even they don't even go for that dream or that profession. So
yep.
that's
And I was lucky. I mean, I had talent, and I jumped into it very early with a kind of clinical brain on how to dissect what I was doing. So
hmm
I could. And I've always been my own worst critic. The amount of papers I've ripped up, even comic pages.
mm,
It's recently as I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. Just this is a piece of junk, and tear it up and start over. And so I think that helped me a lot. Plus, I was sculpting since I was a little kid, and
right.
so my mind is always seen in 3D. And not knowing it then, but I always loved the structure of things, even the structure of vehicles and armor and how everything works. So that, I think, really enabled me to get a early jump, especially with the help I had from my teacher that introduced me to Loomis and solidified
hmm
what structure was for me. And then, the year of the Kubert School, where I was really able to brush up what I did. So I was, pretty able to get into comics really young at 20, 21.
So the timeline of your career, I know it's kind of intermixed with working for Hasbro and then DC Hasbro Marvel. Is that how it goes?
My first job were at Marvel. My first jobs.
Okay.
So they Sector's toy book and two
Right.
8-page stories for Iron Rose, which was was it, I think, Marvel Black and White back then.
Okay.
Then it was, and that was canceled before they were printed. But what the Sector's job was fun and easy. The Iron Rose job, the two jobs were hard, and it was drawing cute women and motorcycles. And I wanted to draw superheroes, but I got that, and what I learned from it was that I wasn't ready for comics. I couldn't do it in a time frame that I was happy with what I was doing. So I jumped out of comics and started doing stuff for TSR and illustration stuff. And that led to doing illustrations for G.I. Joe for presentation pieces. They were, Dr. Martin Dye paintings of proposed G.I. Joes, all for in-house consumption. And a lot of the art's been seen and printed in different places, and that led to the full-time job. I hired to work on G.I. Joe, which I worked on for 2 weeks, I think. Designed 2 Joes, and then C.O.P.S came in, and they put me on that immediately. And that was a dream. They wanted to originally do it on the same buck as G.I. Joe, but 6 inches tall. And I talked them into letting me create 3 different bucks and one main heroic buck, so that they would actually be tougher looking than those narrow-shouldered G.I. Joes. So that was really cool that they let me do that. And great learning experience.
For anybody listening that doesn't know C.O.P.S, it's not that the C.O.P.S came in and made him work. As he worked on C.O.P.S, C.O.P.S.
Yes.
So
C.O.P.S and crooks.
Yeah. So the TSR stuff, you when you were working for them, was that when you did some of those kind of choose your own adventure books, or is that a second stint with?
I did Wolverine and Doctor Strange, I think.
Yeah, and I did a little research to find out that the Strange was inked by Mark Nelson, and Mark Nelson goes on to be the first artist for Aliens, I believe, for the Dark.
Oh, that's cool. I did not know that. I don't even have copies of the Doctor Strange stuff I did.
Yeah, they're not. I've never seen them before in person, but I was doing a little bit of research, and then somebody had photographed the inside first page, and I was like, "Oh, here's the credits. You can, you were credited in there," which is interesting, because if you look back at that era of gaming books or just any books that are comic adjacent, most of those artists never get credited.
Right, depending on whatever the IP was that the company was they were working for. Yeah.
So it's all dependent. DC is a lot less likely to credit than Marvel. I'll say that. And it's kind of been that way in comics for a long time. If you look at some of those old House of Mysteries, House of Secrets, like writes and signed his name. He was smart enough to always put his name
right on there.
Yeah. And then a lot of guys did not, and they would not credit those guys at all.
Yeah, that's awful. Like a comic.
Yeah. Seriously, we'll get to that, because there is a piece of your career where I never knew it was your art until I heard you talk about it. But so then Hasbro, and then you quit comics for a little bit, right? You kind of were done with drawing.
Well, I was at Hasbro, and while I was at Hasbro, I started doing covers for Sal Quartuccio Productions, who was doing the reprints of Judge Dredd and Rogue Trooper and all that stuff from England. And that was the stuff where, it was printed like magazine size in England, and they squeezed it all to fit into comics, the American comics. So they all looked funky, but I got to do a bunch of covers for that, which was great because it kept my hand in illustration. And then when C.O.P.S, DC came up to launch the C.O.P.S book, because they had been working on a TV, the animated show, after I'd done the first season of designs. And the marketing guy, it's a great dude, and he knew a lot of the stuff that we were doing, but he knew I loved comics. So he's like, "Why don't you bring your portfolio to the meeting and come sit in the meeting with us with DC?" I'm like, "Okay." And when they got done talking about C.O.P.S, Andy Helfer was the editor. He and Doug Munch came up, and they said, "I guess you got your portfolio. You want to take a look?" I'm like, "Sure." So we looked through it, and he's like, "Hey, you want to draw some comic stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, give me a call." So he called me and he offered me issue 4 of the C.O.P.S series.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, great. And he's like, whatever you do, don't quit your job because comics isn't a sure thing, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, eh. So I quit the next day. And pretty much it was a year to the day I was hired.
Right.
Which was pretty funny. Because I remember I had the same interviewer for my exit interview that I had for my entrance interview. My entrance interview, the guy hated me. I went in there. Of course, I showed up with a blonde mohawk. And probably Mickey Mouse glasses for my entrance interview. And when I left, it was funny because he was like, I didn't think you'd last 2 weeks. And, here you've been here a year. You've got 3 letters of commendation, and blah, blah, blah. And why are you leaving? I said, because I gave you guys an offer. When you gave me a raise, I told you what I needed and that would keep me staying. And you guys said no. So I'm going to draw comics. And so I quit and did issue 4 of C.O.P.S for DC. Mm-hmm. And this should have really clued me in as to how comics work. Because I finished issue 4 and Andy said, okay, I got the next issue for you. I'm like, great. He's like, it's going to be issue 3. I'm like, I just did issue 4. He's like, yeah, the penciler's still working on issue 1, which he was working on before I started issue 4. So I ended up doing issue 3 and then a bunch of covers. And then he gave me Spectre monthly.
Right.
And those were 24-page stories back then. And it was a Monday, I recall, and I was finishing up page 6 of the pencils, page a day. This is my second week on Spectre. And Andy called me an afternoon, like Monday, late evening or early evening, and asked me if, he told me he needed me to do an issue of Invasion because McFarlane had quit to go to go do Spider-Man and left them in the lurch. And he said, can you come in Friday morning for a meeting? We're going to have a big kickoff meeting, get everybody up to speed on, where the project is and what we need. And I said, sure. And I lived in Syracuse, so it was a 5-6 hour drive into the city. Mm-hmm. The meeting was at 11 a.m., so I had to leave like 6 in the morning or something to get there in time. 5 or 6, I can't remember. And he's like, great. So I need you to bring pages in when you come. I said, of course, I'll bring in, everything I've done. By then, he's like, no, I need you to bring in the whole book. I'm like, this is page 6. There's 18 pages left. It's Monday night, and I have to leave like at 5 a.m. Friday morning. He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's 18 pages in 3 days. He's like, yeah, you can do it. I'm like, I can't do that. Yeah, you can do it. I can't do that, Andy. That's nuts. I can't do it. I can't do it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So finally, I'm like, fine. I'll bring in all the pages Friday. And somehow I brought in 18 pages of pencils, and I hated every one of them.
Yeah.
But they were done. And the thing I hated most about that is Mark Pennington, my buddy from Hasbro and Kubert School before that, was inking Spectre. It was his first, real big professional comic job. So he had to ink these crapped out pages, 18 crapped out pages.
So he's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah. So I always felt bad about that, but I got it done and then got to do Invasion, and that I had to do 8 pages a week to get that done, which was nuts. And luckily Keith wrote it, Keith Giffen, and as probably everyone is familiar, he writes in 8.5 by 11 layouts. Right. So all I did was blow those up and put them on a light box and start penciling because all the storytelling was there. It made it. I would have never been able to do it if I had to do it from a script. Or it would look like crap.
So my question with Invasion, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did all 3 covers?
Yes, and the poster.
Okay. So the poster, the covers, a couple questions. There's no credit of you on 1 and 2 at all.
Oh, really?
Third issue is the only one where you get credit. So that was always my confusion. Like, I'm assuming, did they ask you, was it your kind of ideas, like kind of to draw it to make it look like Todd, did it at all? I mean, because I always thought that Todd did those covers. And then when I hear you talking about it, I'm like,
the first one, I mean, it's that alien. And the only reference I had was Todd.
Right.
Yep, that one. So that, clearly could look like anybody could have drawn that. There's There's nothing to it. So yeah, and 2 is and 3 is Superman. Now that's just me drawing a cover.
Yeah.
Early days.
Here's my question.
Yeah.
Down right here. Is that your signature? It looks like it says
No,
S.
that's Rubenstein. You know what? He put an S and an R for Sears and Rubenstein because Joe inked them.
So I think that's
how that came about.
Yeah, I think that's where my confusion lied, because it doesn't have your name on the inside in the third issue, obviously.
I wouldn't be surprised if my name's under the little box.
Once again, DC
I would have had no idea.
Yeah, DC doing what they can.
The poster was funny because I got this little sketch of it that for some reason Matt Groening designed the poster. And I have no idea why.
Yeah,
Matt Groening, I mean, Simpsons dude, or it came out to be the Simpsons. I don't remember, but apparently he did the poster design. I don't know. It's crazy.
You don't still have any images of that, do you?
No. Well, I don't think I even have Xeroxes of. I might have Xerox. I don't know. I've got so many boxes of stuff. I mean, because I've always worked on a light box, so I've saved every underdrawing I've ever done. So I've got boxes of that stuff, and then I've got boxes of Xeroxes, and I still haven't been through all of everything in the last, because I started going through it before we moved from Florida back here over 2 years ago, and I'm still not through it all, and we're still badly organized.
Yeah,
but I don't even know if I have Xerox of any of that stuff. Yeah, some of it I do. But
yeah. I'm glad that I now know the mystery of Invasion and why, because it was their big, and I wasn't reading comics yet, because I think this was, or at least I wasn't reading this, because I was that like 87, 88 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 87 or maybe 88, and I think Justice League Europe hit late 88 or 89.
Right.
Yes, and probably 87 or 88.
So JLE comes about. You're working with Keith again, and everybody apparently, he was. I never met the man, but everybody speaks very highly about him and loves his comics. And what was your? Did he ask specifically to have you come on that book?
I have no idea. I know Helfer told me it was my reward for doing Invasion, for saving their butts and getting it done 8 pages a week when they needed it. So my reward was Justice League Europe. So I don't know if Keith had anything to do with that, or if it was just the work on Invasion, or what it was. But that's how it was put to me.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. DC's always been able to take the scrappy, the scrappy guys and turn them into these books that end up having this like cult following that becomes legendary. I mean, I've had even Chip Zdarsky told me it's one of his favorite books of all time was Justice League Era. Yeah. So, and I have a couple of friends that are a little bit older than me that said that was one of their favorite books from DC at the time. It was like nobody wanted to read Batman, nobody wanted to read Superman. It was, it was a book like that.
Such fun books. I mean, I wish I understood how fun and different those books were for the time period. Sure. But I was so busy grinding, it didn't come to me till later just how much fun and how beloved those books were for, their fans.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of people got really excited when they put that into an omnibus, and, everybody gets it collected. What, any fond memories about that specific run? Or is it just a blur because it was like you're just hitting the ground running?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any. I mean, Keith and I would talk infrequently on the phone, probably once a month, which was always fun because he was just a blast to talk to. And I don't know. Helfer always told me that Europe sold like always a little better than America.
Yeah,
so that was always cool to know. And I know Adam was always bugging to draw Justice League Europe because he wanted to draw some of those heroes. No, it's yours. But, that was, I don't know. Those were crazy times because they had a fill-in for issue 9, and then Andy asked me to ink it. So I don't know what the purpose of that was.
Yeah.
But
That's just having you do the issue.
yeah, it was bizarre. So I didn't understand that one. And oh, I know. It, when I was put on Justice League Europe, it was like November. So I started it like end of November, early December, the first issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was supposed to come out, I think Andy told me in June. Like it was going to be their big summer push, that book. And I was at a convention in Toronto, and somebody came up and were like, oh, I can't wait to see Justice League Europe. I'm so excited. You know, it's out in March. I can't wait. I'm like, what do you mean March? It's January, and I just started issue 2. He's like, oh yeah, it's in previews or whatever it was back then. I don't know if it was Diamond or if DC had their own distributor. I can't remember, or a different one. I don't know. So I was like, oh. So I get back Monday morning. You know, I would say 9 a.m., but Andy never got into the office before 11. So probably 11:30. I call him at DC, and I'm like, you told me June. It's like, oh no, it's coming out in March, and you're late. So I'm like, you're kidding me. So I was always late on that book. I mean, according to their schedule, they never shipped late or anything, but it was never on the dream schedule that they upped. So that was another learning experience about comics work. So
yeah, and as we as we get into the 90s, you know, and I'm not, this is not reflection of you, but just in general, comics start to trip over themselves, and lateness becomes, you know,
especially after 2000, after
the
you know, they really exploded, and there were so many comics and so many guys that a lot of guys, you know, it was becoming a penciler's medium, you know, where the pencil line was, you know, kind of a finished line rather than a suggestion for an inker, and it kind of changed how people penciled and slowed down penciling by far. One of my bones at DC was I always wanted to get on, you know, the miniseries, because those projects were always, you know, higher paid, and they were making a lot of money for a lot less work, and I was really enjoying that. And they never really wanted me to put on one because I was one of the guys that could regularly do a monthly. And those were becoming rarer and rarer. So I understood it, but it was always kind of annoying. And I should say about Andy Helfer is he was great. I mean, he had a young family, and almost every month he was pushing them to give me a raise. So my first year there, my pay just till, you know, I could actually survive doing comics. And that was great. I'll always, you know, always think fondly of him for that. It's different day in comic then.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and over at Marvel at that time, you know, there are a lot of people that loved Jim, and then some people that didn't love Jim, you know. So getting into the 90s, I mean, the 90s is really like, there was so much.
I'm sorry, I said 2000s before, didn't I? But I meant 90s.
Yeah, no, I knew what you meant. But with the 90s, like, your name, I was not able to escape it in the best way possible, as we can see behind me. What's the timeline? Wizards first, and then you're in Valiant, right?
Yes. Yeah, because I started with Wizard when I was working on Legends of the Dark Knight 21, 22, and 23. And my other close friend from Kubert School, Mark McNabb, was running the Kubert graphics design studio. Yeah. And a young Gareb Seamus went there because he wanted to do this magazine idea, but he didn't know anything about putting a book together. So he connected with Mark to, you know, put all the books together and figure out how to do all this stuff. And Mark actually hooked him up with McFarlane to get that first cover.
Right.
And McNabb was like, you need covers, you need interior art. You should talk to Bart. And so he got my number, and I started talking with Gareb and started doing the covers and, you know, a bunch of other stuff for him. And he eventually, you know, asked me if I would be interested. I was teaching at the Kubert School at the same time. And he asked me if I wanted to do a column, you know, how to draw, comic drawing column. And I said, sure. So he said, you know, come up with something and we'll do it. So I came up with Brutes and Babes, and that's how that was born.
Well, let's give a little tip of the hat to you, because in the first 100 issues, you are the most prolific cover artist in Wizard history, with 11 published covers and 5 unpublished covers, which is quite insane to think You know,
And
like,
some of them were 3 panels.
yeah. Some of them were, right. Like the Sabretooth Wolverine, the
That was a double.
Venom. Yeah. The Venom Carnage.
X-Men Valiant was 3, and there was a
Yeah.
DC Marvel one that was 3 as well.
So, the one that kind of, and I know you've talked about it, and I mean, for me, I bought it from issue 1. I'm a Todd Maniac fan, so I see his art, and I picked that up, and then I was hooked. I probably
It was a
bought
great magazine. I love that magazine. It was so good for comics.
at the time. It was awesome. In hindsight, we talked about this at Heroes a little bit. Like, you can definitely put it as one of the markers for the reason of the excess and what happens.
Oh yeah.
But from an art standpoint, and you could talk about it from the art standpoint of somebody like me. I'm not an artist, but I loved looking through it. And then the Brutes and Babes column, I've heard, I would say probably every artist that's in my range of 45, 1 out of every 3 of them will say Brutes and Babes is the reason that they got better, or they started to draw, or they moved that direction.
I've heard that a lot. And it's very, very humbling. I mean,
well, look,
I was so lucky.
It's the easiest
to have that opportunity.
When you think about it, right? Like, in the 90s, you could go to the library and pick out a bunch of books. You could take an art class and have a teacher that maybe nurtures, or sees something in you. But for kids reading comics, you pick up Wizard maybe to get the free ash can or get the free trading card, and you open it up, and here's this column teaching you how to draw all these different things. Like, that's like early. I mean, I look at Wizard, and I think this is pretty much easy to make this correlation. Wizard was the early internet for comics.
Yes.
And
definitely.
so free drawing column
it that way, but that's a very good analogy.
Yeah, that's I mean, fanzines were a big thing in the 70s and 60s and into the 80s, but this became the kind of like news source, because some of it obviously was complete horseshit, but a lot of it wasn't.
Yes. A lot of fluff in there.
Yes, yeah. But let's talk about the Venom cover, because that's the one that the Flash one was they did 2 covers for that issue, so not everybody saw the Flash cover.
Yep.
But the Venom one really blew the lid off the magazine.
Yes. Derek told me it kind of saved the magazine because they couldn't keep it in stock. They had to reprint it. It just flew off the shelves, and it really put them over the hump, so to speak.
Yeah. And to think, I mean, your Joker cover for that issue was good, but it's not as good as what that, that turned into, that Venom cover.
Well, it was perfect for me. I mean, over muscled, dude, it was just perfect at that time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was stunned that Gareb went along with my idea of using my middle name instead of my full name. And part of it was play, and he was real curious to see if such a cool cover would sell without a name artist on it, because they're all about promoting writers and artists' names, right? And I was moderately worried that DC would be upset I was doing so much for a different company, even though it's not competition. It's actually marketing, for myself and them and the whole comic industry. I was, a tad bit worried they would, be like, you're a day late. Did you do another Wizard cover, or something? And, and they were my contracted job that I had insurance through.
Sure.
So I didn't want to risk that. So he was game for it. And
I'm trying to, because the internet didn't exist then, it's hard for me to remember, like, what the public, like maybe Comic Store Talk was like, oh, who's this Whitman guy? Do you remember, were you going to an LCS at that point? Like, were people really confused?
Yes, people were really, really confused. And cons weren't as big back then. They were starting to grow, but they weren't as big back then. Maybe store appearances were a little bigger. I can't remember, because I did a bunch of them around that time with DC and Valiant and stuff. But yeah, there was a lot of people would be like, "Are you Whitman?" I kind of think it's you, but and,
Yeah,
like I knew it.
yeah. I bet. Did you have a lot of those experiences? Like somebody bring it up to you to sign, and you're like, "Yeah, that's me," and they're like,
Yeah. Or they'd have me sign Brutes and Babes, and I'd be like, "You want me to sign the cover?" And they're like, "Are you women?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, a lot of that, a ton of that."
That's great. I mean, because
And some of that's still these days.
Yeah.
It's rare because Wizard isn't known by younger people, but some of the older people will bring them out and be like, "Did you do this?" Which is always fun seeing a 60-year-old guy being like, trying not to offend in case it's not me.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing.
Awesome.
When I went to Heroes this year, I didn't want to bring 2 pounds of Wizards in my suitcase from Washington, but I got a couple signed by you, and I had you sign the ones that were Whitman as Whitman, and it's like, this is like finally meeting the masked wrestler, like the luchador after 30 years of his career wearing the mask, but Wizard,
and I was so bad. I even wrote the name. I spelled it differently on different covers.
Yeah,
because I forget.
It's okay.
The first one, I didn't realize there was an H in it because I've never used my middle name. I didn't know.
That's right. And then you started signing it Wittman.
Yeah.
But that's like kind of like it almost makes it that much more of an inside joke because like there's 3 different spellings of it and 3 different covers. But so when you're doing these like unused covers, you're still like, you never got any of that artwork back, right? Garib kept it all.
No, part of the deal was they kept it all.
Yeah.
And at the time they paid tremendously,
of course,
compared to DC and Marvel cover rates. I know the industry's changed where covers are premium now, but back then it was like, I don't know, 15% over page rate or something. It wasn't 20% over page rate. It wasn't that different than doing a page. The big difference came because you ink your own covers, and that was like doubling your normal page rate for pencilings. But they paid much better than that back then. I mean, it still wasn't great, but it was definitely worth it, especially for the exposure and the coolness. Getting to draw stuff you don't normally get to draw. Yeah.
Because if you're not, you're not on a Spider-Man book, you're not doing Carnage and Venom, you're not, on an X-Men book, you're not doing Wolverine, Sabretooth. But you even got to do Spawn. I mean, like, there's not. You pretty much touched as much as you could with those Wizard covers. Which is a great thing.
Yep. I've been extremely, extremely lucky, and the people I've met and the things I've been allowed and, able to do. Been really, really lucky.
So with Mark McNabb, he seems to have been, for at least the first 35, he was their in-house colorist for all the work. Yep. That's pretty impressive. Is he still in the business?
Oh yeah, he's got McNabb Studios. He does mostly graphic design, but a lot of comic coloring, a lot of indie stuff. He, for a long time, I don't know if anybody realized it, but all the covers you saw in, I don't know if it's still that way, but all the covers you saw in previews, those weren't the final colors. Those were all McNabb. They would send 70 color covers or whatever it was, and he would color them all, every month. And they just pretty much used them for previews. And maybe he didn't get all of them. Maybe he just got the ones that weren't pre-colored already. I don't really remember exactly how it worked, but that's what he did for years and years, was all that stuff, a lot of that behind the scenes coloring for Marvel Comics.
I mean, it seemed that, especially as you get into the computer coloring era, which would be the 90s, it seems there's a couple of guys that just kind of had a stronghold on, like, look at Steve Olive. Olive did everything else probably.
Yes. Yep. It was so new and so hard to do back then. I mean, because you click a gradient, you'd go get a cup of coffee and have a smoke and come back and, go out and have another cigarette, because it was going to take a half hour for, this tiny gradient to fill in. It was crazy.
And you just got to hope that it's saved. Otherwise, you got to do it all over again.
Yeah, when I built my color studio for the first version of Ominous, I bought the most powerful Apple computer I could buy, and it had 256 megabytes. And everybody's phone's more powerful than that.
Yeah, like
it was crazy.
The jump in technology in 10, 12 years. I mean, it's scary because like when you think about the jump in technology in the last 5 years,
yeah,
we're talking about stuff that's now damaging every industry. It's not just the art industry; it's every industry. But it is. Going back to Brutes and Babes, was did Garib encourage you to turn it into a comic? Like, where does that?
Yes, actually. I hired Sean Husvar, who became partners with at the second Ominous Press, as a marketing manager for the first Ominous, as we were ramping up. And he and I went down and met with Garib to talk about the company and what to do. And they both talked me into doing Brute and Babe as the first comic because they were recognizable characters, that people already knew and this and that. And I had never wanted to do that. They weren't part of my Ominous universe.
Sure.
So, they finally convinced me to do it. And I did it. And I'm probably half glad I did. But because I just wanted to do Giant Killer. I still do. Still haven't gotten to do anything much with him. But that was not my plan when I envisioned it all. It was those two guys talking me into it, from a marketing and sales standpoint.
I think, and I don't know, maybe you can agree, maybe you disagree. I think that kind of thinking, like the marketing thinking, is one of the reasons why, in like 94, 95, we just start to see it slide. I mean,
yes,
I only really stepped away from comics for like 2 years, like 96, 97. And then my friend gave me Frank Miller stuff and Alan Moore stuff. And, I read Watchmen and I read, I started to dig into the deep, good, great pieces of comic history. But I think the marketing, and I wasn't able to recognize it. I was, 14, 15, 16. But yeah, but every industry has done it. I mean, movies have killed, got themselves.
The collectors initially, the card, they destroyed the card industry, and then they found comics. And that was the same time Wizard was started. And it was also the same time Valiant was starting. And Valiant were very marketing savvy. I mean, they underprinted their first year and a half of comics. They didn't fulfill full orders of anything so that their comics always ran out and you couldn't get them. And they created this artificially inflated value and desire for their books, which culminated in Turok 1, and then that with the 6 Death of Supermans. Was it the Superman or the Rebirth? I don't remember.
It was Death into Rebirth. It was the breaking of Batman's back. We're all like kind of a
6 issue thing that came out in 1 month. And they say it came out like the same month as Turok, and that put a third of the comic shops out of business that month alone.
Everybody over
nuts. Yeah. I mean, a guy at CrossGen, to kind of, dig me, bought a box of Turok Golds, a sealed box for like $7 when I was at CrossGen, just to like, how many to sell? I'm like, I know. Everybody's got long boxes full of those things.
It is really interesting about what you said about the underordered or underprinted first stuff, like, your Magnus, your Harbinger, and there was one more. Exo.
Yeah.
Because those I remember knowing that they existed, but I was never able to find them. No shop had them, and then it was Turok 1. So let's talk Valiant. You come aboard after Shooter's Gone, or you come aboard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you come aboard after Shooter's Gone, and they're just like, we're gonna do Turok. Were you familiar with Turok from the Gold Key?
Oh yeah, because I had comics as a kid, so we had a lot of Dell Gold Key comics floating around. So, we actually had, they were beat up, but, Turok comics from his original run floating around the house. So, I knew who Turok was. So, I thought that was pretty cool. What
Yeah.
what I did, which was wrong back then, is I convinced myself I could pencil 2 books a month,
Oof.
and if I had to, I certainly could. But
Sure.
what I didn't take into account was the pressure of wanting them to be high quality.
Hmm.
So I flamed. That's why I flamed out of my first Valiant run. I guess my only Valiant run. Well, no, it's not my only because Valiant's back now. But
Yeah.
out of that first Valiant Tide run, just because I couldn't produce it, and I wasn't smart enough or mature enough to let them know that. I just let it go how it went, and I could
Yeah.
have stopped it and readjusted everything and been fine. But I didn't know how to admit I couldn't do it. So
Yeah.
I just kept trying and, failing. So that was not fun.
Well,
Not
I
fun at all.
bet. I will say this, like for this cover, this book, it's got its, like kind of like punchline, obviously, because there's a million three,
Million
1.3
seven.
million, million seven. Okay. Right. Cause I think Capital or one of the distributors bought like a third of the print run or something.
I don't know. But they only
But,
paid me for $1.5 million. They never owned up to the other 200,000, at least to me.
um, but
Bitter, bitter.
all that being said though, like your art in this book is amazing. Like that it's just like a full on, I can't say much for the writing, but you didn't write it, so I'm not really worrying
Yeah,
about offending you on that. But art
I would
wise, like
agree on that point as well. I wasn't thrilled with the story,
right.
but
But you did some great, it's
and
paced great.
Randy was at the top of his game. Randy Elliott, who
Mhm.
inked it, man,
Yeah.
he was screaming good back then. It was a perfect match.
Yeah. He threw a bunch of great silhouettes in there. There's a lot to love about the Turok books. But I mean I we don't have to talk dollar amount, but is this the most successful monetary, like is
Oh
this the
yeah.
most? Yeah.
Oh, you know, uh, by a lot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was how I was able to start the first Ominous Press, was because of Turok. I mean,
Hmm.
the 2 Exos I did and the 2 Turoks.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are, I mean, they're, it's interesting because I go back and I look and I'm fan of a lot of the artists that came out of the 90s, whether it's, it's it's, the image guys. I felt like everybody was pushing everybody to do bigger and, literally bigger characters, but your art definitely has this feel to it that it's like muscles on top of muscles, but they're all carefully, your obsession or your love for anatomy really shines through in a book like this where, it doesn't feel out of place. It just feels bigger.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And once again, like Turok, we joke as comic collectors, comic sellers, like I have 40 copies of them. I give them out to people. Like I'll throw
Yeah.
them in packages and stuff. But at the end of the day, like that cover, the chromium holds a lot of place in my heart, but the interior artwork is just
Oh,
fun to
thanks.
look at. Yeah.
It was funny because that whole cover was supposed to be chromium.
Mm.
It was supposed to be a full chromium cover, but whatever company was doing the chromium, at the last minute, we're like, we can't do it. So they could do the insert that was glued in, and they took the dinosaurs from an ad that I had drawn for Exo and
Hmm.
Turok and mirrored them and used that as the frame. So I think it's a pretty cool, successful cover. And
Definitely.
it's one of the, it's a gimmick cover I like,
Hmm.
that I don't think was just a gimmick for gimmick's sake. And on the same token, the Eclipso gem cover was a gimmick cover I loved because it made
Yep.
sense. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a gimmick for gimmick's sake. And I know collectors hated it because it couldn't box and it was, bending
It
comics.
damages all the books that it lays
Yeah,
on top of.
yeah.
That
But I thought it was a great gimmick.
the Eclipso one is probably, I still think of that as the craziest gimmick cover of all of them. Like there was, like I said, you stack them on top of each other,
It's an
they
8-inch
damage.
thick gem.
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty substantial.
it's it's so funny. Like I'm glad that I'm able to talk to people that were creating comics in the 90s and we can laugh at the fact that like it didn't damage my life. Like I didn't sink thousands of dollars into these books. these days, if I'm going to sink that kind of money into it, it's going to be something that's silver, golden age, you know,
Yeah.
or original art. That's
Right.
where I like put my money. But it's still funny to think about the excess, because you're right with the trading cards. If you go back and look, and I started collecting baseball cards in the 80s, and my dad and my brother, they both collected, and you look at that stuff and it's so mass produced and none of it is worth money. And
Yeah.
it's just like, I feel bad for the stores, the store owners. You feel bad for. I don't feel bad for the publishers, and I do not feel bad for people like me, because I didn't lose my ass on anything.
Yeah.
But you know, it's just it's interesting, because now where the comics industry is, it's a whole different beast, and the excess is just in variant covers. That's it's, you know.
Yeah.
But
which,
so,
you know, I'm not necessarily a fan of, but I'm not a fan of, and I've done a ton of variant covers. So, you know, for me, they worked out well. But I mean, when I see, you know, 20 different variant covers, it's kind of like, okay, that's a little excessive, but
yeah,
you know,
it's definitely a little bit excessive.
You know, 2 or 3, if there's some kind of, you know, that's cool with it, and especially for indie comics where, you know, you aren't getting 30,000, you know, someone, you know, a high volume of monthly or even in, you know, miniseries comics or graphic novels to have some way to make in, you know, sell some extra copies. Sure, you know, run with it, guys.
Sure. You know, you said about miniseries, you know, when you were first started working, I actually kind of prefer them all together. I'd rather read a contained story than a monthly that's doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
Because gone are the days of the one and done.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of funny, because really the only reason the industry went to, you know, like 4-issue or 6-issue stories within monthly books is because artists couldn't do monthly books.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. That's why they did it, so that they wouldn't miss ship dates. They could have multiple projects and work at the same time that didn't necessarily, you know, count on each other as continuity or continuity. And, you know, it made sense for them business wise, because they weren't having to suddenly throw in a random fill-in like they did in the early days when they got in trouble. And, you know, and they got so much crap for late shipping stuff, you know, no company wanted to ship late ever again. So hence the mini series within the series.
Right. I assume the answer is no, but you didn't have any involvement in the Turok video game at all, right?
No,
design work or anything. Okay.
Yep, that was all. I don't even know.
Yeah, that was
actually not a bad video game.
It was great. And people cite it, including myself. Like Nintendo 64 is it's definitely one of the best. I would put it in the top 10 Nintendo 64 games.
People still talk about it. You know, I talk video games with people. They're always asking about, you know, Turok and you know, how much they enjoyed the video game. So
yeah. But I assumed you didn't have any involvement in it. So through this 90s period, you're doing also a lot of toy designing, which is interesting. Marvel mostly, right? With
Toy Biz. Toy Biz. Somebody from Marvel contacted me and asked, you know, knew that I had done toy design and done all the cops and some G.I. Joe stuff and a bunch of wrestlers. And they asked if I'd be interested in working with Toy Biz on the Marvel hero stuff. So I said, sure. So the people from Toy Biz called me and they said, and this is in the 90s, early 90s, and they said, we really need somebody who understands things in 3 dimensions, which we know you do, because you've done tons of turnarounds and we've seen your stuff. And our guys can't figure out what any of these characters look like from the comic books, because they're drawn differently in every panel. You know, the chess piece doesn't look the same from the side view as it does from the front view. You know, we can tell. So they're like, my guys don't know what to do. So like, can you give us, you know, turnarounds that work? And I'm like, sure. So that was pretty much why I got hired to do it, is because I could look at, you know, the 10 reference shots they sent me and make something cool out of whatever it was that was still the character, and but made sense to somebody having to sculpt it. So I did it, I think 12 in the first year I worked there, and then did most of the second and third year.
Which
And
was a lot of X-Men, right?
yeah, mostly X-Men.
Yeah.
I think there was some Fantastic Four in there.
You did a USA agent, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I do? Yeah, I did a bunch of stuff. I did a lot of package art too for them.
Yeah.
The reason I built my first Ominous Press studio in the color studio is Toy Biz talked to me. They were giving me the contract to do all the package art and all the 3 views.
Mm-hmm.
So I built a studio where I trained some guys to help on the 3 views. I would do a rough design of the figure, and they would do all of the finish rendering on the tech and the bodies and stuff, and then I would do the heads. And I also built and trained a color studio to do computer color for all the package art. Wow. And it's a bit of a sore spot, but I was supposed to start in January, so I had people hired. I had the studio ready to go in January, and I'm like, "Where's the stuff? We're ready to go." And they're like, "Oh, it's coming. We're still working on the contract, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Okay." February, it's nothing. March, nothing. And finally in March, I was able to get my contact on the phone, and she admitted that they weren't going to give me either contract. And I was like, okay, which is why I started doing the comics, because I had all these people I was paying that I'd hired for months. Yeah. So we started actually working hard on the comics and any other stuff I could find that they could do. And but it was annoying because they were sending out my stuff to a bunch of artists, and a lot of guys I had trained at the Kubert School were like, mimic this, do it like this, and that was very annoying.
Yeah.
Business wise, I understood I was more expensive, but it's just like, why did you tell me if you were not going to do that? Why didn't you tell me right away?
Sure.
That was sleazy, but
these companies aren't known for being. Yeah, and these companies aren't known for being the most stand-up companies in the world.
Yeah, and who am I to talk? I couldn't tell Valiant I wasn't able to do what I'd promised either. So, you live and you learn, and hopefully you grow.
Yeah, that's all you can hope for. You can't change the past. You can only just learn from it. One of the other series that I was always kind of fascinated with, and I know his scripts are wild. You did the first 2 issues of the Violator miniseries. Crossing once again, having some paths crossing with Todd, doing that, but it was Alan Moore scripts, so his scripts are wild, right?
Yeah, his scripts are thick, and what he also sent with Violator was he did thumbnails for every page.
Yeah,
so he sent that along. So I mean, there's so much detail in those scripts, so it was crazy, and plus with the thumbnails and stuff, it was pretty wild. And I know I waited for a while in the script, and this was after Valiant, and I started my studio, and I told Todd I was burnt out, and I didn't know I couldn't commit to a deadline because right now drawing comics is like alien to me. It's hard to put pencil to paper for it. He's like, don't worry about it. But eventually that's why he fired me and hired
right. Capullo.
Greg to do the 3rd issue, which he didn't tell me about until I finished the 2nd issue and asked him when the 3rd was coming. And that's when he said, "Oh, you aren't working on this anymore." Okay. So,
but it's a great series, though.
Yeah, it was crazy fun and just so sick and twisted.
Yeah.
I mean, that clown guy was just insane. But what a blast. What a blast it was.
Yeah, and then it's it's very strange to me when you look back. It's like Alan Moore did like 8 years at Image or something like that. He did a bunch of minis, and then he hops on Supreme. He did the 1963 stuff with Bissett and I believe that's Rick Veitch, and it's wild to go back and look at that. So Omnibus Press comes after, but let's talk about CrossGen, because CrossGen I was out. That was probably when I stopped reading comics for a couple of years, but it's kind of this thing of legend with Mark Alessi he basically
Yeah.
like hires everybody, but you had to move down to Florida.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I was in the second wave
Mm-hmm.
for the fifth book they were doing. And yeah, he was nuts. And, I bought into it. He had a
Mm-hmm.
plan and he wouldn't tell anybody his plan. Come to find out his plan was basically no plan, just that it should work because it's a good idea. And the studio itself was great. I mean, there was,
Right.
it was tough, but it was definitely a creative boiling pot or something. I mean, everybody working there got better. And it was because you could walk around and see what, Jimmy Chung's doing or what Brandon's putting up or Steve or Paul Pelletier, stuff I just love. Scott Eaton, you could see all this great stuff because you pinned your page up at the end of every day. And for me, it was awesome, especially probably the first 3 months, because I just went in, did my page a day and left. And that was heaven to me.
Right.
And I slowly kept getting called more and more into, do art directing stuff, which he told me I wasn't going to do. So don't even think about it when he hired me, but he just kept calling me in more and more. And then it got more hectic because then it was eating up a lot of my time. And so then, weekends were gone and all that stuff, but it was fun. Wouldn't change it. And a lot of great people worked there.
Sure.
And it wasn't for everybody, coming in every day. And Alessi was not a fun guy to walk around. He was a bit of a bully, and he enjoyed that. And some guys could take it, some guys couldn't. So I worked pretty hard at trying to keep him out of the back. Walk around and look, but let the guys work. They know what they're doing.
Yeah. That's what they're there for.
You go up and say, when his feet look too small, you're crushing some guy. It might be 3 days before you can draw anything else. Depending on who it is. Just
sure.
Look at the great stuff when it comes out. But it was a good time. I mean, it was hard, and it definitely ended badly for everyone. But
in theory, though, it should have been like that's the kind of dream everybody wants. Is like just I will do this. I will get this done. We're just here to make comics and be creative. But yeah, I think it's a person who was more in tune with the comic, not just the comic industry, but artists and how they work, like might have been the right fit. But people look fondly back at CrossGen stuff, and
the books are all really high quality. And for 3.5 years, every book came out when it was scheduled, which was not always easy because there were a few guys that really had trouble doing 10 issues a year. And so there was, limited ways to adjust or fix that. So it was tough making sure everything came out, but did it for 3.5 years. Well, I was there after probably the first 6 issues, 4 or 5 or 6 issues came out. So, but yeah, it was not easy and tense at times, but overall fun and a great place. And it should have worked. I would say it was just mismanaged.
Which, we hear a lot about, not just, but inside the comics industry, outside, but in the comics industry, there's so much that's been mismanaged on a unfortunate public and, legendary scale. But
and the big companies have done it as well. I mean, they've definitely ruined things they shouldn't have just by poor management. So it's not something that little companies do or startups do or anything else. It's not an easy business, and it's certainly not one that you can enter into expecting to get rich.
No, not at all.
Something wrong with you.
Yeah, because like that the I don't even think that when Valiant started or Image started, like anybody thought it was going to be like I'm going to get rich. It was more like we're going to get away from the system of the big two and see what we can produce. Yeah,
and do our own books our own way, and not have to deal with you can't use so and so in this issue or whatever,
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that kind of period where there's a lot of great indies and I love them. And I think especially where comics have gone in the last couple of years, where most of the indie stuff is going to horror or sci-fi, genre, because
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about, oh, this character looks too much like this character, we're going to sue you, or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah.
But
And it's just tough to compete with, Batman or Spider-Man, in for somebody's purse strings, It's it's tough to get somebody to buy into a new superhero series. A couple have succeeded, but they're doing things that Marvel and DC couldn't do. The Boys,
right,
and
Invincible,
and those are the two that come to mind. That are superheroes that succeeded outside of the Image stuff and the DC Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an easy nut to crack.
No, it's not, because it's like you try and think of an idea and you're like, oh, well, this is that character, or this is that character. It's too similar. But, ideas will come and they'll blossom. It's just the house of ideas is what they used to call Marvel, right? And Jack Kirby came up with so much. It's like, he didn't leave much for the rest of anybody else.
No. He took it all.
Yeah, he really did. After your series with you did Spider-Woman, working off of was it Byrne scripts, right?
Yep. Byrne sentences.
How did that compare?
That was pretty awesome. I mean, all he wrote were 168 sentences, and each sentence was a panel.
Yeah.
So I did whatever I wanted with it, and that was a blast. And it was also around the time I discovered that I think you got paid $15 less for doing breakdowns than for doing full pencils.
Oh my God.
Which I could break down a whole book in a week easy.
Yeah.
And, full pencils is 30 days of hard, laborious work. And my favorite part is the storytelling, breaking it down. Mm-hmm. So once that option was available, I can't remember what issue I penciled through, maybe sometime in the third issue or fourth issue. I don't remember. But I just started doing breakdowns for Randy to ink. And, that was a great job. I really enjoyed that. Blade was a little different because I wanted to pencil Blade.
Yeah.
And they just kept pushing it off because they searched for a year for a writer for it and they couldn't find anything they liked. And I asked them if I could submit a proposal because I loved Blade. That movie was awesome. That was just such a brilliant movie. And I'd always liked Blade, but seeing him like that, I was like, my brain exploded. So loved the character. And I got to do the movie adaptation. And then right after it wasn't really an adaptation. It was sort of like tangentially similar to the movie. We're basically using the movie character, but a different story. And it was supposed to come out right after that. I was supposed to just translate right into it. And it took them a year of not finding anyone that they liked what they were doing. And I did the proposal and they loved it and said, let's do it. And, I guess they immediately put it on the schedule. I don't know, but the schedule was so tight. I penciled like 5 or 6 pages and schedule wise, I had to do breakdowns and there was no time for me to finish penciling it. So I had to switch to breakdowns. And, even at that, I could only do 4 issues because Andy had to come in and pencil the last 2 issues just to make the deadlines, and that was awful. I hated that because I really wanted to pencil that book. But
it's a tough book. It's a tough book to find. I don't remember it coming out, and then I remember finding
retailers were pissed.
Yeah,
they did a survey, and the answer that they told me the retailers gave on the survey was, "You waited too long. Why'd you wait so long? Blade was 2 years ago. Why did this come out now?" And it was because, it took a year for them to figure out, who was going to do it. And then it took, another 6 or 8 months for the book to hit the stand. So it was almost 2 years from when they wanted it to come out. And retailers were just they were just like, we don't care. That was their thing. We don't care. Blade's old. If this came out 2 years ago, it'd be great. But they didn't want anything to do with it. So retailers' anger pretty much killed it.
Which is kind of wild too, because the sequel came out maybe a couple years after, and now people look back at it and cite the first movie, second, even the, as being some of the best superhero movies because it was before the greater universe, it was
Yeah.
before, and it's Wesley. I mean, like
Yeah,
he
they're
may have,
good movies. We just watched
yeah,
them last week. They're
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. And the
Third
second movie
one.
too. Yeah. But the third one, the funny thing about the third one is because of the history behind how detached he was from that movie, it kind of makes that movie better.
Yeah.
Like they digitally opened his eyes and all that stuff. And Ryan Reynolds, obviously a lot of things have changed since then. So
It was so funny. I watched that, but all of Ryan Reynolds' jokes, there's nobody even comments on in the whole
I
thing. Nobody's
know.
like, "Oh, you're so annoying," or nobody's rolling their eyes. He just says them and they fall flat. It's like they killed him in that movie. It was like because nobody paid any attention to him and anything he said. It
His
was
it,
crazy.
he has a couple of great lines against Parker Posey's character that I won't repeat
Yeah.
here. I don't want to get YouTube angry at me for especially one of those lines. But yeah, I love those Blade movies, and yeah, that series. Like I said, I got it at some point, but I didn't know when
Mhm.
it came out. Um,
And it shocked me. That was the first thing I'd professionally written,
mhm.
and I just threw everything into it. And I
Yeah,
expected to get, a list of notes to adjust the plot and how to tweak things and make it better. And especially dialogue, how to, you know, strengthen the dialogue. It's a little weak here. It doesn't say, I never got a
no.
single note. Everything I wrote is right there. And I was like, oh, I hope it's good. I have no idea. I don't know how to edit myself as a writer at that
Right.
point. So there it is. But I was pretty shocked that I got nothing. It just
No. I
fed
mean,
into the system.
is that, or you think that's a reflection of Marvel in the late '90s, early 2000s? Yeah,
Yeah.
because who was editor in chief at that point? It was pre Quesada, right?
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah,
maybe it was Bob Harris, or
yeah.
it
That
might have been before Bob.
okay.
I can't remember. I don't think I have a blade. No, I don't have
Uh,
anything here. But
yeah.
I think it was either Harris or right before.
Hmm.
I think, but I could be way wrong.
Yeah, yeah. They it took them a couple more years after that to kind of get the ship righted. Uh,
Yeah,
but then when they
yeah, they had
did,
some hard years.
yeah, they
Yeah,
did. Yeah.
yeah, they
It,
had some
it
really really tough times.
it's interesting. Like I can't, and maybe you can because you've been doing this longer and been in on this planet a little bit longer. But has there been a time where DC and Marvel like at the same time were sailing? Because like even in the '90s, it felt like Marvel was sailing
I
and
think in the
DC was
'80s.
flailing. Yeah.
I think in the '80s, before the '90s hit, and the collectors got in the business, because when I started at DC, um, I think their average monthly book sale was 90, 100,000.
Oh wow.
And good books, could hit 400,000, maybe 500,000. Some of the Justice Leagues or Batmans or something.
Hmm.
Um, but they didn't even think about canceling a book until it hit 30,000 in sales. And I was in witness to conversations where a book had hit like 29,000 or something. And they were talking to Helfer about it because he was editing it. And they're like, should we cancel it? What are we going to do? And he's like, can we keep it running until we find another book for these guys? Because they're good guys. I want to keep them working.
That's
And the
great.
book's not bad. It's just not clicking right now. Can we keep it going for, 6 more months until we can line something else up for them? And they were like, yeah, we can do that. That was how at least DC operated back then. And I'm pretty sure Marvel was probably much the same way.
Hmm.
But I was
Yeah.
much more entrenched in DC then. But they really thought of themselves as family and their artists they protected and worked hard, to keep working and to look out for.
Hmm.
And that came through in every interaction with DC back in the day and Marvel. Less so, but I was never that entrenched at Marvel. I mean, when I quit DC, I still had 9 years on an exclusive.
Yeah. Oh.
Uh, it was nuts, but Valiant wooed me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, I guess it's always a consequence of corporations buying, or whoever takes over. It just shit rolls downhill, and
Yeah.
you.
Well, and back then they were a loss leader. I don't know
Mhm.
who owned DC back then. Was it Warner?
I think it was Time Warner.
Time Warner, and they paid no attention to DC because DC didn't really make any money, and if they lost money, it was a tax write-off. So Warner just left them alone. So they were free to run the business pretty much how they wanted, and Levitz was a good guy, and that reflected all the way down, and Dick was a great guy, and they knew they had all come from the ranks, so they knew what it was like to be a struggling penciler, inker, colorist, writer. So they wanted to make it better for people, as much as they could within their structure, and what they could deal with, and they did that with exclusives and insurance and keeping people working, and they looked out for you. So that was really cool.
I got to imagine. Maybe you witnessed this. We look at Marvel and DC now; they're IP farms. Batman 89's got to be the reason for, maybe that's where it starts. Batman 8, Burton releases Batman 89. Then everybody's like, okay, what's the next one? And you start to see comic sales and comic production go into the millions basically the next year.
Yeah.
And,
but I think that was more the collectors in the movie.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
Even when a Marvel movie were big and coming out, they didn't bump sales at all of books. It was pretty much flatline. Nobody that loved the movies suddenly decided they wanted to read comics, or at least not enough to make any real difference in the industry. So I think that was much more so the collectors. But what it did was it made the companies say, "Oh, instead of making a profit of $2 million a year in the comic book company, we can make a profit of $70 million on a movie." Whoa, we've got to look at this. What are these comic companies doing? And I think that's what started to really change the companies. And then the comics started selling. The corporations were like, okay, these are making money on their own, great. And then when that died, then the companies really came in and said, "Oh, you guys are running this wrong, so we'll show you how to run them."
Yeah, I was having a conversation the other day. I might have been on a live show on the channel about how, like, Marvel could easily turn some of these moviegoers into readers. Put 40 copies facsimile or 50 facsimile copies of New Mutants 98 in the theaters right now. Buy your ticket to go see Deadpool Wolverine, maybe a facsimile of Hulk 181, and it's right there. Like, I can't imagine a kid with their parents wouldn't be like, "Mom, can you buy that comic book?"
And they could put them in there for $1.
Yeah.
They don't have, because it's nothing in comparison to. They wouldn't even notice it in the budget of that film.
No, not at all.
They wouldn't even notice it. The whole production of the comic they could put in there, and they could sell it for $1 a quarter. They could do whatever they wanted, and they could sell out 1,000 of them the first weekend of a movie
per theater.
And probably get 20% of those people to go to a comic shop that had never been.
Yeah. It behooves me. I wonder if are they afraid of a guy like Liefeld coming after them for more money, or a guy like, we can't talk about Wolverine because apparently Roy Thomas created Wolverine now, but but I just wonder if they're like afraid to give more shine to the people that put these characters in paper.
My understanding is they've taken care of everything.
Yeah.
They bought out any character they thought they were ever going to use. They bought out in some way, shape, or form, or made some deal with. So, I don't know if those deals are ongoing or if it was a final, we're going to give you X and go away, and, so I have no idea. But that does remind me, I've got to find out who to contact at Marvel about Madam X. Or Madam Web, because I got a credit in there.
Oh, that's right.
My only movie credit, and I've never heard from them, so I gotta. But they won't contact you and say, "Oh, we owe you money."
Oh, yeah, that'll never happen. That'll never happen.
DC didn't do it when they used that horrible pink Crimson Fox in the Titans, whatever that show was.
Oh yeah, I did not watch it, but it was Titans.
Met Keith at a show, and I'm like, "Hey, did you ever get royalties for Crimson Fox?" He's like, "Oh yeah, you didn't?" I'm like, "No." He's like,
Yeah,
here's the
you
name.
gotta beat. Yeah,
Call
you
this
gotta beat
dude.
down their door.
So I called and they were like, oh, you didn't get that? I'm like, no. So
It's
they don't care.
no.
So I got to
I mean,
contact Marvel and figure that out.
would you say that? I mean, in general, like the vibe. But I don't want to call it a dirty. But is there a piece of comics that is just truly, from the standpoint of the publishers, not the artists, not the writers, but from the publishers? Is it always just kind of been a little bit of a dirty business of like trying not to pay people for their work?
Um, I didn't have that experience in the early days of Marvel or DC.
Mm-hmm.
They were always willing to give you raises. They were always willing to give you contracts and insurance. You know, they weren't ever saying, eh. And
Yeah.
they let me, I never said anything. So I'd be at lunches with the higher ups and they would talk about how funny Top Rate was because Top Rate was whatever they decided to pay the next guy. You know, there was never a top rate. They laughed about it at dinners. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, it's probably not good talking about this stuff when I'm here because I'm going to tell everybody I know, which I did. And
Yeah.
so everybody just went, I don't care what top rate is. I want this, you know. But they didn't care.
Yeah.
And, you know, they wanted people to survive doing comics. They didn't want to, you know, because they knew if they didn't pay a guy, he was going to do other work to make ends meet and your book wasn't going to come out in time.
Yeah.
You know? So they wanted to, you know, take care of you as best they could. And, you know, I know people had to fight to get royalties, you know, and Neil was a big part of that and to get original art back and different stuff like that. But, you know, the people running the companies wanted that.
Sure.
You know, they wanted that because they knew what it was like. They were like, sure, yeah, you should get your art back. Yeah, you should, you know, get royalties for, you know, books and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't think they got, there were probably a few guys that fought it on the lower end corporate, but, you know, to my understanding, it was a bigger corporate fight to get it. And, you know, and that took people inside the company to say, yeah, we got to do this. So,
yeah, you hear a lot of stories pre your era, obviously. And like you said, Neo, and, I've even seen an interview with Bernie Wrightson talking about how, they used to give kids tours of the DC offices. And then at the end of the tour, they open up this closet, take one page, whatever you want. And then he spoke to the fact that if that closet got too full, they'd burn art. Yeah. And it's like, oh my God. I mean, it's not even the monetary value, the historical value of this doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, Hasbro did the same thing. They would just throw it in a dumpster. When the drawers got full, they just emptied them out. And, you know, some of the smart guys that worked there realized this and knew what day was throw it out day. So they would dumpster dive that night and grab a bunch of cool original paintings and concept art and all kinds of stuff. You know, they just take everything. And that's the only reason any of that stuff exists.
Yeah, yeah. It is crazy to me, though, when you see, some of the people that were buying Golden Age stuff, the EC stuff, like they knew to hold on to it, but then there's a lot of other stuff that just doesn't, it's no longer part of this universe. It's ash and dust. I wanted to ask
I guess the lucky thing was going to Hubert School because he had like a Sunday page that was like 4 foot high. Who was the artist? He did Flash Gordon, Alex Raymond. He had an Alex Raymond Sunday. It was massive, framed in there, and a ton of his old covers with all the nasty paste ups and stuff they used to do. Yeah, but it's gorgeous. I love paste ups. I love. Yeah, it's real authentic to me when you've got all that stuff on a cover, So, I mean, that was my first experience with actual original art, and I was like, oh, this stuff is a treasure. I hadn't really thought about it. Before that there was any value to it, seeing that like that and seeing what it was and getting to see that really, turn a wheel in my head. They're like, oh yeah, this stuff is precious. So that was really cool.
Yeah, it's precious. It's as the world moves digitally almost completely, it really does become a piece of history. Like this is how art was produced for comics. And then, when you're talking about paste
for 100 years.
Yeah. And that goes into magazines. It goes into illustration books, and I love looking at this stuff. It's nice to own it too. It's nice to know that I get to be the steward of it. And then obviously if I want to sell a piece, it's also nice to know that I've got some money sitting here
Exactly.
in my portfolios.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah. So Les, I want to ask you about Maiden and Heavy Metal Magazine. How'd you hook up with them?
How did we hook up with Maiden? I don't know. It was through Matt Medney. And I don't know if I guess he must have contacted me, or maybe Ron met him, Ron Mars, and
Mm-hmm.
we did I think a Santa story for them. I think that was the first thing I did with heavy metal. And they were looking for new properties. My wife is my writing partner, and she had this great idea, Maiden, that came to her in a dream. And I had done some drawing for it, and we'd started to shape it into the story it became. And we pitched that to them, and they loved it. So we ran with it, and I did all that digitally. The first, the only thing that was printed was the first 5-section story, 40-page story that was in 5 8-page sections, and it was a blast. But heavy metal went how heavy metal did, and actually back there I have some of the pages for the second story that I started, and they stopped communicating, and we just stopped working on it because we saw how things were going. So that was kind of a shame, and plus we couldn't get any comp copies at all. The only issue, we found the first issue of heavy metal in a bookstore, and we were never able to get any of the others.
Oh wow!
Not even online. And so many people, I feel bad, a lot of my fans ordered it through heavy metal, never ever got it, paid for it, subscribed to it, never got it. And maybe they've made that good now, the new ownership, I don't know. We talked with the new ownership, and they eventually released all the rights to Maiden back to us. So we own it again, and now we've just are working with Panic to bring Maiden back. So we're in the early stages of that. Hopefully the first story, I think a short story, will be in their Zoop primer whenever that's scheduled, and then I think Maiden will be out early next year.
Oh, cool.
So pretty excited about that.
And that you own it is a great thing.
Yeah. And we fully own it with Panic. There's no split ownership, split profit, but not split ownership. Right. So that's exciting. I can't wait to really start digging into that. We've got a lot of it written. I mean, we originally came up with 20 stories. So we have 20 stories in various forms, maybe 22. Because our contract with heavy metal was for 20 stories. It was over 600 pages of Maiden content over however many years it took us to complete it. But, that didn't work out clearly. But we have all that stuff, and we created a new #1 story to take the place of Neoma the Bride, which was the first Maiden story. So we've got a new #1 story that has a lot of the introductory stuff that issue had. And then we got a 12-page story that'll be in the primer, which gives a little more of information so that when you go into Maiden, you've got some knowledge of how the world works, or the worlds, because it's across time and space. So
kind of like a soft reboot in a way.
Yeah. So that's pretty exciting and pretty cool.
Awesome.
And Panic is great. And Chris Longo, who's the CEO who started Panic, he really helped us. He was at heavy metal at the end, and he really was a good conduit and helped us get the rights back. So that was pretty cool of him to go above and beyond to help us out.
Great.
We got another property we're in talks with, which looks like it's going to go, called Dreadlands.
Dreadlands,
a sword and sorcery western, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, we'll get that nailed down soon.
Anything else that you have coming out or has recently come out?
I talked to Big Bad Toy Store. It's an online toy retailer.
Yeah. And
they've got rights to C.O.P.S, so they're going to be redoing the figures I did at 6 inches.
Oh, nice.
More articulation and extra heads and hands and accessories. And we're talking about I'm going to do all the package art for that stuff.
Oh, great.
The new stuff, and maybe design some new stuff and some other toy design stuff for them. So I'm excited about that because that's part of the, another industry I really have a strong feeling for.
Yeah, so and it's your origin. It's kind of your origins, and
C.O.P.S was great to me, so I will, and I love it. And I kind of feel like it's my baby. The
Yeah.
stuff I got for C.O.P.S from whoever created it that Hasbro bought out was, they were all swipes of John Romita Jr. Spider-Man characters, basically. So, I had to reimagine most of them. Big Boss was pretty much exactly the same, but the rest I had to pretty much reimagine. But that was a blast.
It's interesting the way that the toy industry obviously took a leaps and bounds once again. Todd really pushed everybody to have to get better. And now we've gotten to a place where I guess maybe we could call them bespoke toys, or like these almost custom companies that are like
$45-$65 for a 6-inch figure.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, but at the same time, it's also like they're only making an X amount, so get them. Otherwise, you're going to buy them on the secondary for double eventually.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting to see. Like, I think it's because kids after my generation, the kids that are 10 in 2000 and 2000 or 2005, they have video games, and action figures kind of didn't become a thing. So it's like, oh, let's just make these toys for the people that want to put them on a shelf and look at them, and But I love that. I collected
they're
all
great.
that.
I mean, toys are awesome now. I mean, I remember, I think every paint operation was a penny, and like this figure had 8 cents for paint. So I'm like, oh, I can do 8 different paint places on him. How do I do that? It was nuts. And, clearly that's a far different world than what we have today, even for Hasbro and them, because their toys are, I don't know, what is a normal action figure from Hasbro these days, $20.
Yeah, probably $15 to $20.
Yeah, I mean they're not these $2.99 throwaways anymore.
Yeah, but it's it is, like I said, it's just really nice to see. I don't collect toys too much anymore, but I'll buy something every once in a while when it jumps out at me, because I mean, I gotta look at this stuff though that he's doing, especially McFarlane with the cover recreation figures, and it's like, okay, so I get to own a figure that is an homage to this great DC cover.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and like Star Wars stuff has gotten just crazy. Like I have a friend that collects that stuff, and he has the Mandalorian ship, and it's like, it's this, it's gigantic, but it's every little
a whole nother house to put it in.
Yeah, they catered to us collectors. Really, they found a way to do it without insulting us. That's the thing. I feel like
you get a $300 ship that's this big that is perfect. I mean, you don't feel cheated,
right?
You got like the Kenner Millennium Falcon for $50 or whatever it was back in the day, and you're like, well, it's cool.
Yeah. Then all the stickers started falling off, and this is like, you try to put your figure in there, and it's like, but so before we get going, this is going to air. You're going to be at Terrificon next weekend.
Yes.
And in Connecticut, Mohegan Sun. This is going to air the morning of Sunday, but do you have any other cons coming up after that?
I'm going to Cincinnati in October. I'm doing something the 3rd weekend of September. That's in Hamilton,
Ontario.
Yep.
I'll get those dates in the description. BartSearsArt.com, right?
Yep. Bart Sears Art at Instagram and Facebook.
And all those links will be down below. I have to ask, for the original art fans, how's your commission list looking these days?
I still have too many to do.
Fair enough.
I have too many to do. I've got this cool big one. I don't even know, but it's going to be really cool. But I'll show you this. Well,
I'll tell people to, just keep their eyes open to see if you have any open spots, because I know your commission list.
I do, day commissions at the shows. So
right.
And I do headshots or torsos only. But
cool. Anything else that you want to mention promoting, or?
That's pretty much it right now. I'm excited about Maiden. That's going to be cool because the stories are so intense.
Mm-hmm.
They're emotional to work on in so many ways. And Dreadlands coming up is just, Sword and Sorcery is my heart and soul. And most stories I write have that feel, at least to me. And but this is going to be a hardcore Sword and Sorcery Western, and I love it. And hopefully we'll have that to look forward to real soon here. And then the C.O.P.S stuff, that's just It's just music in my ears right there.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get those figures.
You were talking about doing some drawing tutorials. Is that something for the future that you're going to be doing on YouTube?
I've got a Kickstarter I want to do called Barbarians that I started work on, and I really want to do a Patreon kind of thing and a YouTube channel with art. But every time I get started on that, I get more work, and it gets kind of pushed back, which is annoying. And I haven't found that. I've never had a work-life balance, except for those first 3 months at CrossGen. And, I'm still looking for a work balance where life doesn't intrude too much on it, and it doesn't intrude on the life too much. But older and slower, so I'll figure it out.
I appreciate all your time, Bart.
Oh, no, this has been great. Anytime, man.
Thanks for listening to that lengthy, great interview with Bart. You can watch the video for this on my YouTube channel, West Coast Davengers. You're going to see some bonus material in that interview, including a cameo from that little rascal comic, Tim. You can check out Bart's links down below, bartsearsart.com. And please don't forget, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Rate the podcast on the platform you're listening to it on. It helps push it out to new listeners. And I think that's it. I may be taking the next week off, so you might not hear another episode for 2 weeks. And if that's the case, I'll see you then. Thanks for listening to Bart Sears Radio.